All right, so let's make a start. So to recap, basically what we would have done in last week's class. So in addition to reviewing the SBA, reviewing the IPO chart, reviewing the pseudocode, and yeah, that's basically it, reviewing what you have to do for it. We started chapter 10.2, whereby we're looking at how to create a Pascal program. So I would have given you guys the general structure of a Pascal program, and it's basically this here, that just like your pseudocode, your Pascal program is going to start with a keyword program and is going to have a title. So if we look at this example here, notice we have the keyword program and we have a title here. So the title here is example 2. Then the next part is where we are going to declare our variables. And in order for us to declare our variables, we have to start with the keyword var. And then afterwards, this is the structure of declaring a variable. You put the name of the variable, followed by a colon, followed by the data type, followed by a semicolon. So we can see that example here. We have the keyword var, and here we have some examples of declaration. Name of the variable, colon, followed by the data type, followed by the semicolon. Now remember, the semicolon is used to indicate the end of a line, so that's why we have it at the end of these lines here. And indentation, please remember, indentation is important also. Indentation helps to organize your data, organize the flow, makes it easier to read, because this could be like this here, in line basically with the with that margin area there, like that. But then it's much easier to read it as being indented out here, to know that it basically falls under this heading at the top here. So that's why we indent, to show all of this information is a part of this section here. So it's much more clearer to see that. Now, so once again, the tab key does not work. You'll have to manually space it out. Now, after that variable declaration is where you're going to start the body of your program. And the body of your program starts with the keyword begin. So with that body now is where you're going to put all of your input, all of your processing, all of your output, and your initialization in that body. So your initialization is going to come first. So these are some examples of initializing. You put the name of the variable, followed by a colon, then an equal sign, and whatever value you want it to be initialized with, followed by a semicolon. So notice the difference between a declaration and an initialization. The only difference is one has a data type, one has a value, one has an equal sign, and one does not have an equal sign. Now after you initialize, that's where the body of your program basically starts. You put all your input, you put all your processing, your calculation, your output, whatever you need as part of your program, and then you end your program with the keyword end. So I have that at the bottom here, end, and a full stop, a period, to indicate that's the end of my program. So those are the basic parts of a Pascal program. Please note that is for a Pascal program. Different programming languages might have different structures, but it's the Same general parts. Title, initialization, declaration, and so on. But we're focusing on Pascal here. Now, if there's any question from anyone, feel free to ask. Otherwise, if no question, we're going to continue from where we left off. We are going to be looking at, so this was the last example. Example 2 we were looking at. Oh, I'm not sure if I showed it in the last week. I doubt I did because it's not in the program. You can add comments to your program, and you need to add comments to your program because that's part of the criteria when creating your program to add comments. So how do you do that? Well, you simply open a curly bracket and you simply type whatever you want in the curly bracket. So this is my title. You close curly bracket, and this here, and this here is a comment. What do we use a comment for? We basically use a comment to give additional information in the code of your program. Now, these comments do not appear in the output. They do not affect your program in any way. All they do is basically give you additional information when you're looking at the code. So for example, also, you guys would have to add in your program information such as author, who created the program, followed by date when it was created, purpose, to add numbers. So these general information should be added to your program also. Who is the author of your program, when it was created, and what is the purpose of your program. And notice, remember all of it is in curly brackets. Notice it can be in line with the code. It can go by itself. And when I select compile, notice I get compile successful. If I take away a curly bracket, what's going to happen? When I select compile, program expected. So it's running into some error here. And so you have to be careful because it's not telling you clearly that a curly bracket is missing. So you have to be careful when you're writing your code because some errors are not that clear. So notice when I run, I don't see any of those information in the output area here because all of those can only be seen inside of this coded area. So that is the purpose of comments, to give you additional information when you're reading your code. Now, let's continue. Give me 1 second. Let me check for this syntax for fixing the decimal place. So that's going to be :0:2. All right, so let's try that. So for the variable, let's see here. So we have age. Now we need to do it for cost of drivers permit. So after the variable, we are going to put a colon followed by a 0 another colon followed by a 2. Let's see if this works. Compile, run. Great. So notice we have 2 decimal places there. So the last digit is basically how many decimal places you want. So this is how you format a real data type so that you can get how many ever decimal places you want. So I'm going to replace the 2 with a 0, compile, and now notice I have 250. If I want 5 decimal places, simply put a 5 there, compile and run, and I have 5 zeros at the end here. What is the first one? Let me add a 1 there. Two. Anybody by chance know what the first one does? 3. Not noticing a difference. How to format a real in Pascal. So this has to do something with spaces. Integer after the second column. Or it's not. Alright, I'll check that more later on as to what the Pamela, do you know by any chance?
Sir, when we did it last night, it was just that whatever integer comes in front of the decimal, you don't really have to like edit it because that's the full answer. So you just leave it at 0.
Okay. It has to do something with space. I'll look into it later on. So, but this is the we were gonna only need to focus basically on the last digit though, because that's all basically we need. The last digit to show us how many decimal places we want there. So that is how we format our real so that we can get the right amount of decimal places. So in your case, you guys can use 2 decimal places. I think that was the formatting instructions for spreadsheet, 2 decimal places. And say for instance, just in case you got to output a percentage, like say for instance this age here, if it was, notice we have 18 here. So like if we wanted to output 18%, after that age variable, you can place a comma and then a quotation mark, percentage symbol, close quotation, compile, expression expected. Oh, it's a single quotation, single quote. Yeah, that, compile, run. I notice we got 18% there, 18 with a percentage symbol. So this is how you can combine in your output words, letters along with a variable. So if you wanted a space between that symbol and the 18, you could have put a space in the quotation mark there. And notice we have that exact output there. Or say for instance, like in this case here, say for instance, this 250 was supposed to be yes, it is a cost, so that has to be a value. So at this line here that you see me highlighting, where it says cost of driver's permit, colon. So basically after the space, it's basically just looking at where you can position the words, and you put the $ there after the space. So now when you compile and run, notice we have a $ and then that 250 there. And we're seeing that in the output. So we're getting that formatting there basically. So the formatting is basically you adding it as an output. That's how we format. You adding it as an output. Are you guys following and all that so far?
Yes, sir.
Any questions from anyone? All right, so let's continue. Remember, any point in time you have a question, you can stop me and let me know. All right, so what we're going to be moving on to next is, let's see. Okay, so we're going to be looking at how to add the conditional statements into our program. Let me just go through the paragraph in case I miss anything. So program statements are the instructions which will carry out the requirements of the program. The following examples illustrate the use of conditional statements such as if then else. A variable form is defined and a value is assigned to it. A conditional statement that determines which message should be displayed. Okay, nothing important. All right, so let's look at the example. You guys should also try to create the program also. That way that's going to be of benefit to you. Let me save this here and open a new file. All right, so let's go ahead. So program conditional semicolon var. Now notice you can actually type all of it. You can actually type everything in the same line and the program would actually work. So if we open back this program here, I could type all of this information in the same line. I can put all of that in the same line. And we can get one very long line. And notice even though all that is in the same line, compile successful. And when I run, it works. Why? Because the program doesn't necessarily need to be organized. It's just that we as humans need it to be organized so that we can read it properly. So in programming, the program doesn't differentiate basically. One thing is in one line, another thing is in another line. Technically, it doesn't really do that. What it's actually doing, it is, let me just close it and reopen it because I don't want to save it. What it is actually doing, it is looking for the semantics, which is basically the symbols that has the meaning, the keywords that has the meaning. So like in this case here, it's looking for this keyword program. And then it's looking for this semicolon for it to know that that's the end of this section here. That's the end of that part. And then as it continues, it's going to look for this var keyword. and then it's going to look for if there is any variables initialized. And once again, the semicolon indicating that. So it's like if you could write everything in one line, you could. And it's going to look for all these punctuations, all these keywords, and the program will work if you do that correctly. But the reason why we put everything in different lines, we add space, we indent and so on, it's all for organizing, all for keeping our information neat, presentable, so that we can read it properly in the end. Yeah, so that's why this line here, that's why everything there is in that line. So program conditional var form, but I'm still going to put it in another line and organize it. Begin. So the form variable is equal to integer, begin, and we're going to initialize form to the value of 3. Now this is where we're going to be adding some new information. We're going to be looking at the conditional statement. Now if, open brackets, remember this is the syntax for creating an if conditional statement in your Pascal program. So if form is equal to 3, remember you always ask it in a question format. If form is equal to 3, now notice there is no semicolon at the end here, because that is not the end of our statement. Remember, the semicolon is to indicate the end of a statement, the end of a line. But in this case here, that's not our end. So even though we're going to another line, the then is a part of the if statement. So, but remember the then is true if the question is true. So if form is equal to 3, then if that is true, write on the screen, which is right line, promoted to form 3. I'll put in brackets, true. Else, write not promoted to form 3. And I'll put in in comments, this is false. Next line. So notice at the end here, I have to put my semicolon, because that's the end of the if statement. So I'm going to put my end here. I'm going to put a line of space here so that I can differentiate that. So let's go through the code. Here we have the keyword program and the title conditional. var indicating the start of the declaration. I declared a variable called form as integer. I started the body. I initialized that variable with a 3. And here I am running the conditional statement. I can further separate all the information so it's a bit more readable. And I can further indent also. So I could indent this like this. So I can clearly see now that these two statements are under this if statement here. So if form is equal to 3, and remember to ask in a question, ask as a question. So is form equal to 3? If it is true, then promoted to form 3 is going to appear on the screen. But if it is false, not promoted to form 3 will appear. So let's compile, see if we have any issues. Compile successful, we have no problem. And we run. So notice we have promoted to form 3 because it was true. Now if we change 3 to 6 and we compile and we run, notice we have not promoted to form 3 because the question is form equal to 3? Is 6 equal to 3? The answer is going to be false. 6 is not equal to 3. So we're going to carry out this else part here. Else not promoted to form 3. So a simple if conditional statement as to that there. Were you guys clear on that? Any questions? Now, there is a trick basically that if you want to do multiple actions, so let's test what is going to happen if we place the semicolon at the end of this first line here, at the end of our test. What is going to happen? So I put my semicolon there. Because you could do it by accident. You think at the end of each line, you got to put a semicolon. So you put a semicolon there. What is going to happen? Compile. Notice it's saying clear, then expected. So it's basically saying that it's expecting this then keyword here because that's a part of the statement. If, then, else. That's all a part of the statement. So if I remove it from here now, and I'm going to put that semicolon at the end of the then line. And I compile. Notice statement expected. Now, you don't necessarily need to have else. So I'm going to remove it. That's why it's saying statement expected. Compile. Notice compile successful. Because if you guys can remember from when we were looking at pseudocode, we have two types of conditional statement. We have the if, then, and we have the if, then, else. They're both similar, just that one is only looking at the true. This one here is only looking at true, whereas this one here is looking at both true and false. So if we take out the then from here, what we're basically doing, if we take out the else, what we're basically doing is that we are basically saying we're not considering if the question is false. That's what we're basically doing here. So that's why the compile is successful. But I'm going to add back in the else because we want to consider if it is false. And compile statement expected. Was this indicating that we cannot just put else here? It needs to have an if in front of it. But this semicolon here is stopping it from seeing this if, basically. That's basically what's happening. This else is looking up for this if, but it cannot find it because this here is stopping it. So by removing it, you can now see that it's a part of this one large statement here. So that is why we start with if here and the semicolon goes all the way at the end here. Now, how do you carry out multiple actions inside of the true? As remember, we should be able to do that. If the question is true, we should be able to do multiple things. So I should be able to, and then this is another way also we can carry out formatting. So I could bring this line down here and put this like this to indicate that I have multiple then actions. So here now, I'm just going to copy this. I can move this and put it up here to indicate that's true. Copy this here and put that there. So here now, I can say congratulations. But notice what's going to happen. Compile. It's saying that a semicolon expected. Now, why does it all of a sudden expect a semicolon there? Well, basically, you can only put one statement inside of this, then inside of the false. You can only put one. But there's a trick you have to do to basically overcome that. You would, let me see if I can remember it. I think it's begin and end. Let me see if this is going to work. Still expecting it. That wasn't it. What is it? What is it? What is it? Or does the system automatically detect it? Let me see. Semicolon. There. Compile. Semicolon there. Statements expected. No, you can't put semicolon at all the end there. It's supposed to be a begin to allow you to do multiple. If, then, else. Begin is supposed to work. Begin and end. But do I need end? Was I missing that? Expected.
Sir,
Yeah.
I think when you put the begin and end, you need to put the semicolon at every statement that you're making.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think you need to put another semicolon by the end.
Very good. That's actually what just happened there. Very good though. So what Pamela just said was correct. So if you want to have multiple actions to be carried out inside of this then part, then you need to have this begin keyword. So let me indent once again so that you can see that. So see why indenting is so important. So you can clearly read the flow of the information. So if form 3 is equal to 3, so is it equal to 3? Then if that is true, begin and end. So whatever is inside of this section here, this begin and end, is going to be carried out. And as Pamela mentioned, all of our statements is going to have to end with a semicolon there. Now similarly, the else is here, and if I want multiple also, I'm going to put a begin and let me take this from here, put that there because that's false. Copy that, put that there, and not promoted to form 3. Study better next time. And then I put end here. Semicolon there. Good. So if I compile successful, run. So notice I have 2 actions being carried out here in that same then part and false part. So let me change this 6 to a 3. Compile, run. Promoted to form 3. Congratulations. So to go it over again, We have the question, the if conditional statement. If form is equal to 3, we're asking that question. Then is always if the answer is true. We put the keyword begin because we're trying to put multiple statements. So that has to go between the begin and end. And for each statement, as per the rule, you must end with a semicolon, all of your statements. And then we end with that keyword end to indicate that's the end there of this then part. Now, if that question is false, we're going to jump to the else, and we're going to begin, because we have multiple statements once again, and all of those are ending with a semicolon there. And we have that end keyword to indicate that's the end of that section there. And this is the complete end of the program. So, were all of you able to follow that? Are you guys clear on that? Anybody wants me to go over any parts? Any part you weren't clear on? All right. Good. So that is the if conditional statement. Now, do they have a nest? I'm not seeing a nest. How do you add a nest now? So let's try that. See if we can get a nest. So we're going to modify this one here. We're going to see else. Let me not move this. Let's see if this is going to work. Else if form equal 4. So we're running another test. Then we're supposed to see not promoted. So let's compile. Compile successful. Let's run. So we're going to set form to 3. Run. Promoted to form 3. But if I put it to 4, we're supposed to see not promoted. And we have not promoted there. So that there is correct. So let's go through it. So what we're doing here, we are running a nested if. Basically having one if inside of another. Now, this if here could actually have been in the true, in the then part, could be in the false part, wherever you want it to be. That's up to you. I'm just showing you how you can basically add it. So if form is equal to 3, then if it is true, we carry out that part. So this entire highlighted part is if it is true. Now, if it is false, we're going to this else part here. We're going to go to the next line, which is to run another if. Now, if that is true, we go to the then. Let me see, this is, no, that's going to delete everything. So we begin, we write line, and that ends there. So that's how we run a nested if. So else, or even then, but after that, you basically start with the same structure. You start with the same if, open bracket, form is equal to 4, close bracket, and then the same process. The then keyword, whatever comes after that then is going to be true, but notice we did not consider for the false. Are you guys clear on this one?
Sir, I have a question.
Go ahead.
At the bottom of the nested if condition, right, statement, there is the end right after the end of the program, right? Why don't we place a semicolon by the first end before the final end? Like
This
the
one
one
here.
right before. Yes, where the cursor is at.
So if we do that, I think the system is going to give us, oh, it's going to work. So basically for some keywords, see what happened here. So this semicolon could work because this is like the complete end of this entire if. So the semicolon at the end here could work. But for like this example here, we could not have put a semicolon because then that's breaking the connection from this half with this upper half here. So to answer your question, yes, we could place the semicolon here, but technically we shouldn't have, because if we had to continue it further, like in these cases when we're doing begin and end, they're kind of similar to this begin here and this var, which do not need semicolons. They're like just indicating sections. So they're not really like a statement, they're more keywords like. Whereas these are your statements, so they require the semicolon. But like you saw, you can add it. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, you know that it's breaking the connection with something.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Any other questions from anyone? All right, so let's try it with the true part also. So here we could have put an if also. If open bracket form is equal to 5, then do this here. So I need to add the word then. I'm going to just put it in the same line. Remember, we can work with the same line. So it's getting a bit complicated, but I'm just showing how we can nest those if functions. And it's relatively simple. You just got to understand the structure of one if. You ask a question. If that question is true, then remember, whenever that question is true, whatever is in this true part here is going to be carried out. So if you have a if you have a loop, if you have a calculation, anything there is going to be carried out. So the fact that I'm putting another if, it will work. Compile successful, run. I don't have output. Compile, run. I guess in this case, if it's true. All right, so basically what's happening here is not reaching this false part. It's stopping around here. So the code wasn't, even though, so this is an example of writing a program that even though everything I did was correct, the program did not work. Why? Because it's not logical. Because it's running this true part here and it's entering this if here. And technically, this then is not connected to this else here. This else is connected to this then. I know it's getting complicated, but you gotta look at the it's like one is inside the other. Basically, that's what's happening here. One is inside the other. So it's like this is the outside then, this is the outside else, but this is an inside if now. It's like, think of it in terms of brackets. So we enter this inside here, but you can't just jump outside like that. We have to continue working inside here because we enter this part here. But that's getting very technical. So don't stress if you didn't catch that part there. Just know that the basic structure, let me go back to the simple form. Yeah, I think that is it. Yeah. So let me just go back to the simplest form that you need to remember. We have a if, and we have a question. And remember, it's not only equal to, it could be greater than equal to. Let me see if that's the right order. Good. So that's the right order. The greater than and then the equal sign. If form is greater than equal to 3, so is 4 greater than or equal to 3? So let me put 3 inside of here. Is it greater than equal, or let me put 20? Is 20 greater than equal to 3? Then, if that is true, begin, write, promoted to form 3. Congratulations. So that's if it is true, it's going to be carrying out that. Now, if it is false, remember we run the else, and we're going to run another test. Is the form equal to 4? Then, if it's true, we carry out this part here. So let's compile and see what happens. Compile, run. We get the first one because the first one was true. So it is greater than equal to 3. But I'm going to remove it and put 1. Compile, run. And we do not get an answer because, can anybody tell me why? Why are we not getting an answer? Because you could get a question like this in the exam. So it's a good practice here for you to look at this code and tell me why.
Sir, because the statement for the else, when you put in another if statement, it said if the form is equal to 4 and not 1.
Exactly.
And in this is less than or so.
Exactly. So this else part here, remember, programming is logical. You just got to go line by line, follow everything line by line. So we gave this form here, this variable, a value of 1. So when we reach this line here, we were asking a question. Is 1 greater than equal to 3? Now that is false. That is not true. So we have to ignore this true part here and go to the false because the answer is false. But in this false, I have another test being carried out. If form is equal to 4, I'm now checking to see if it is equal to 4. And if it is true, we carry out this then part. We begin and we write line not promoted to form 3 and so on. But remember, there is no else here. I'm not considering if it is false. So that's why I'm not getting any output here. Because I'm not considering it at this stage here if it is not equal to 4. So in this case here, if I put else, now I'm considering it if it is false. Else, right line, open bracket, quotation, form is less than 4. So now we should see this on the screen here because this is considering if the test is false. So compile, run, form is less than 4. Now we're considering that answer if it is false. Are you guys following? Any questions from anyone? Is it complicated? Are you guys understanding? You're not understanding? What's the situation?
Sir, I understand.
I know you understand, but I won't know about the rest if they don't tell me. Akhilesh kind of understand. Which part you don't understand, Akhilesh? Or you don't want to try to understand? Does the spacing actually matter? No, like I said, all these spaces, what I'm putting here, that you're referring to?
Yes, sir.
No, that doesn't matter. Like I showed you earlier, we could type everything in the same line. But the problem is that when you do type it in the same line, is that you have to go and ensure you're putting everything correctly and following everything. But like when you do it this way, indent, you can clearly see, like for instance, this begin starts here, this end starts here, this then and this else is related to each other. This then and this else is related to each other. So like if all of this were in the same line going straight down, then you would see all of these keywords right to this line here going down. So by indenting, I could clearly see, well in my case, I could clearly see that this then and this else related, this begin and this end related, this then and this else related, this begin and this end related. So to answer your question, the spacing does not matter, but technically it does matter if you want to read your code properly. And like if you go on to like other forms of programming language, like for instance Python, when you're doing an if, you do not use the then keyword. You actually indent, it actually indents automatically. Like for instance, after you type that if, it indents automatically and you start writing the code from there. You do not need to put that then. The indentation tells the system that that's the then part. So that's why you should get accustomed to indenting, because systems use it and it's useful, as I said, for reading purposes, organization purposes. All right, so if no other questions from anyone, let's see. I think that is everything I need to show you on the if statement. I showed you how to use the if statement. I showed you how to do the loop. Not a loop. I showed you how to do the a nested if. I showed you how to add multiple statements inside of an if. Is there any questions? Any comments from anyone? I'm putting the code in the chat if you want to access it. I'm just going to simplify the if in case it's complicating anyone, and then just review it and then move on to the loop. Good. So once again, this is the if statement in its simplest form. You have the if keyword, you have a test inside of a bracket. Remember, that's the syntax, that's the rule. We're checking to see if form is greater than equal to 3. Remember, this could be any question. It could be equal to, it could be less than equal to, whatever is your question. So in this case, we're checking to see if form is greater than equal to 3. Now, the if statement continues with the keyword then. The keyword, then always checks to see if that is true. So whatever statement follows this keyword then is going to be carried out if the question is true. So if form is greater than 3, equal to 3, this is going to appear on the screen. But if it is false, if that question is false, it's going to go to the else keyword. And whatever is under that else keyword is going to be carried out. In this case, we have an output keyword, an output statement, not promoted to form 3. So compile, statement expected, I got to take out these semicolon, compile, run. So notice in my output, not promoted to form 3. Why? Because 1 is not greater than 3. So I got the else here. So if I put 5, is 5 greater than or equal to 3, compile, run, I got promoted to form 3. Which section is that in? It's in this part here, promoted to form 3. Now, if no questions on the if no other comments on the if, we're going to move on to the loop. Shucks, I just realized I didn't copy everything. Study. Let me just finish off this here because I want to store the program. End and end. Hopefully that works. Yeah, compile successful. 4, run, great. Save, nested if. All right, so I'm going to send all these to the group so you guys can test it out. What are we going to do next now? We're going to do the loop. So program while loop. So we're looking at the while loop. Var, we're creating a variable called line. We're giving it a data type of integer. So if you guys can remember from Pascal, from the pseudocode, we always have a variable in the loop to monitor the loop, basically, to see how many times we've repeated that loop, to count the loop, basically. So that variable in this case is line. I notice we initialized it with 0 to indicate we're starting off at 0. So while line is less than 10, do. So that's the structure there. While in brackets, so in bracket is basically a test. We're testing to see if it is less than 10. Now, if it is true, so this is where remembering the differences of the loops, how the loops work. I would have given you guys this already, that whenever the while loop is true, you enter the while loop. So we begin. Now we have to update that loop. You always have to update your loop. So that's going to be, and this is a good example as to how you do a calculation. So notice, just like in your pseudocode, your calculation is on the right hand side and it is storing it on the left hand side. It's kind of just like how you initialize. You say this 0 is going to be stored in this variable called line. Similarly, you take the variable line and you add 1 to it, and then you're going to store that value in the variable line. So we're going to write line, open bracket, IT for CXC. We're going to end. So going back to Pamela's question, because that's the last end, we can put the semicolon there because that's the last end. So that there is the while loop, compile, run. So notice I got IT for CXC multiple times as an output. So let's continue to modify this while loop. Let's try to understand how it's actually working. So we have a variable called line, and we're starting it off with 0. Now, the instruction or the test to see whether we should enter the loop is this question here. Is line less than 10? That's basically what we're doing here. While line is less than 10, or basically, if line is less than 10, do the following. Now notice we added the same begin and end keyword to indicate that this is the beginning of the loop and this is the ending of that loop. So technically, if we remove this line here, let me see if it's going to work, and remove that, and remove that, and remove that, compile. That should run indefinitely. Notice it's not going to stop. That keeps running all the time. Why? Because there is nothing updating the loop. There's nothing updating this variable line. It's going to keep remaining at 0. So what's happening, this is an indefinite loop here. This is going to keep running all the time, over and over and over. It's never going to stop because there is nothing in the code to stop this loop. So this is what's called a running loop. It's just going to keep running and running and running because there's nothing going to stop it. It's called a running loop. So I have to stop it manually. So if you notice the scroll bar here, notice how far it is. And to make it more interesting, let me take out this here. And I can put another variable. So to make it more interesting, so number equal integer. Let me just show you what happens when you have a running loop. So inside of this loop here, I'm just going to simply say number is going to be number plus 1. So what's going to happen is going to keep adding 1 to number. So let's see what's going to happen. What has happened? Oh, runtime error. So notice it's actually telling me number out of range. Runtime error, range error, number out of range. What number is out of range? We type integer. Let's try real. Compile, run. Oh, I'm not outputting anything. Alright, so forget about that because I just wanted to show you guys something, but then I have to add more information. So going back to the while loop, we have to put back the begin, you have to put back the end, So we're trying to understand this while loop that we have here. Line plus 1, right line, IT for CXC. Good. So we have a variable called line here, and we gave it a value of 0. Now we're going to ask a simple question to know whether we are entering the loop. Gotta use long int. Okay, good. But the issue was that I didn't specify output, so I would have taken up too much time going through all of that. So I'm asking a question while line is less than 10, and inside of here is the loop now. So this here is what is going to prevent the loop from running forever. This here is now going to update that variable. This is how we would update a variable. We simply add 1. So every time the loop runs, it's going to keep adding 1 to it. So here, what I can do, I can write right line. Instead of, I don't need to put this. Let me delete this. Instead of IT for CXC, I'm going to output the variable line. So compile, run. What has happened? Good. So notice we have 1 to 10 there. So what just happened? So this is an example of what happens when a loop is carried out. So at the beginning, we're testing to see if line is less than 10. Now it started off with a 0. So it entered because that is true. Now this here is the loop. From begin to end is the loop. We don't go back outside at the top here anymore. We go from begin to end. We're now inside of this area. This is the loop. So we only have 2 lines inside the loop. The first line is to add 1 to the variable called line. So that's going to be 0 plus 1, then 1 plus 1, 2 plus 1, 3 plus 1, 4 plus 1, and so on. So every time I output the variable line, I'm going to see that increment there, like that. So I'm going to just put that as 100, and if I update that to 5, so this is the, I'm looping once this line variable is less than 100, and I'm going to keep adding 5 to this variable called line here now. So compile, run. So notice I got increments of 5 here now. I keep adding 5 to that variable there until it reached 100. So that's basically how we carry out a loop. The while keyword, inside of the bracket, you have a test. This is called your condition. Just like the if had a condition, it's basically a question you're asking. Is the variable line less than 100? Then, if it is true, do the following. Conditions, questions, anytime you come across them, they're always checking for true. They're always checking to see if the question is true. So once this here is true, you enter the loop, and you're going to stay inside the loop once it is true. Whenever it is false, you exit. So exit when false. And that's basically the while loop. Any questions on that there? Were you guys following?
Sir, I have a question. So when you exit the loop, right, and you want, say like you want to write the value for a line, what value would they give you? at the end.
The last value that it has. So we can test it.
Oh.
We say right. Let's copy it. Yeah, it's going to give it the last value. Compile. So notice I got 200 there. So it gave me the last value. So that's to show a program is sequential. A program is logical. It goes one line after each other. So even though from this begin to this end here, it's only 2 lines, it was actually running for what? 5 divided by 100, 50 times. And for that 50 times, even though it ran for that 50 times, it kept the final value. It was like this line here was repeating. It's like if you copied and pasted 50 times, that's 50, that's not 50. 25?
Sir, it's 20.
20? Yes, I don't know where my maths is. Let's not think about that. Either way, so this line here is like if this loop here is basically like if we copied it 20 times. So this here would have run for 20 times, and when it finishes here from here, it's going to continue to the next line and keep going and so on. And all variables keep their value once it does not change. Once nothing tries to put a value into that variable, so like from this point onward, if nothing tries to put a value into the variable line, so this is important to remember. Once nothing tries to put a value into this variable line, it's going to keep that value until the end of the program. So that might be a question in the exam also. Like after the loop, what is the value of that variable at that particular line down in the program? Any other questions? Now, this loop here, this example of this loop, this has to surround your entire program. Because remember, you guys have to run your program for at least 10 times. So this would be a good example as to how you would run a program, run a loop. Count initialize is 0, and while count is less than 10, you keep running what's inside of there. Run inside of this this section here of your program. All right, so let me put it back because I want to save it with a line. And let's try the while compile. Compile run. Good. Save that. All right, so if no questions on that, let's look at the final loop. That is going to be your for loop. So program for loop var line colon integer begin for line. Now, can anybody remember what type of loop is the for loop? And what type of loop is the while loop? Nobody? So the for loop is your, yes, your for loop is your definite loop, meaning you know how many times you want to run the loop for. So if you notice, we're telling it definitely we want to run for 10 times. We want to run from 1 to 10 times. Whereas the while and the repeat are indefinite. So like in the previous example, if I had put a case whereby it couldn't have answered the question, then it had the possibility of running indefinitely. So the for loop, here we have program for loop. We have a variable called line. We declared it as an integer. We're beginning that program, that body. For, so this is the syntax. For the variable line is going to, if you notice this part here, look at this part here. This part here is as though we are initializing this line with a 1. So basically, we're telling it start with a 1. So if you notice, we didn't need to put line, we didn't need to put this here, up here, like that, like in the previous example, like over here. We didn't need to do that, or equal to 0. Why? Because in the for loop, it is already initializing it. It's telling it, look, start off with 1. And then it's going to go to 10. Now, once again, there is no increment. There is no line colon equal line plus 1. Why? Because this is a definite loop. It knows that it needs to automatically update. It knows that it needs to automatically go from 1 to 10, and it will increment by 1. So not because we start with 1, but it will automatically increment by 1. So this is going to go from 1 to 10, do, and whatever is inside of this section here after this loop. So if we wanted to put multiple statements, you would have to use the same rule of begin and end, the same process of begin and end. But because we only have one line, we don't need that begin and end. So let's compile, run. So notice we have 1 to 10 as our output. So look what's going to happen. Let me see if anything's going to happen if we put another line. So write line. Let's see if this is going to work. Hello. Okay, so see what happens. It ran the hello for 9 times, and then it output 10. So it ran this here for the, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Oh, it actually ran the loop for the hello 10 times, but it was updating the line all the while. So that's why it output 10 there. So in this case here, if we wanted both of them together, it would have to be begin, end. Let's see if this is going to work. Output, compile, good. So notice we have hello 1, hello 2, hello 3, hello 4, hello 5, all the way to hello 10. So basically, for all of these statements, if you're only going to put one statement for a certain action to be carried out, you do not need a begin and an end. But if you want that section to have multiple statements, you need that begin and end to indicate those different statements, along with the semicolon to indicate the end of the statement. Any questions on this one? All All right. Where are the programs? So I'm going to open the programs one by one because we basically covered enough for today, basically, I would say. We covered the if, so please have a look at it. This here is the if statement. This is how it is structured. Do any of you have a question? Any part of it you're still not sure about? Once again, the if statement is basically comprising of if, then, the else is optional. The if has the question inside of it, it has the criteria inside of it. If that variable is equal to, is less than, is more than, to whatever particular value, then we're basically asking a question. If it is true, we carry out whatever is in the then part. So if it is one statement, you can put that one statement. But if you need multiple, the same begin and end process needs to be carried out. If it is false, you go to the else statement. The nested if, because you guys have to do that, you have to do a nested if. So how does the nested if work? So if, same process, we ask a question, if form is greater than equal to 3. If that question is true, then we carry out whatever is in this true part here. Now notice we have multiple statements, so we have begin and end. Now at this then part here, right after, instead of right line, we could have had an if. We could have had a calculation. Anything we wanted could have been added there. That is why in this else, we have an if. That's basically called nesting. We're putting one if inside of another if. So at this end here, because this answer here is false to this first if at the top here, we ask another question. If form is equal to 4. Now, if that is true, so ask another question. Now, if that is true, then we carry out whatever is in this true part. But once again, there is no else. Any questions in this one? We also looked at the while loop, because you guys have to incorporate a loop around your entire program. So we looked at two types of loop. We looked at the for loop. So this is an example as to how to incorporate a loop. You must have a variable to monitor the loop, to know how many times you are going through that loop. So in this case, we're using a variable called line, and we initialize it with 0. Now, the syntax is that you start with the keyword while, and then you have a condition. While that variable is less than 10, now because we started off with 0, and we're going to 10, that's basically we're going to run the loop for 10 times, because we're going from 0 to 10. Now, while that line is less than 10, so you always check for true, and if it is true, you enter the loop. So enter loop if true. You begin, You enter the loop if it is true. Now 0 is less than 10. So we carry out the first line, which is to add 1 plus line because we have to update that variable. Why are we updating? To simply say that, look, we ran the loop for 1 time. And then the loop runs again and we update, we run the loop the second time. Then the third time, the fourth time, the fifth, and it continues like that. And then we end here. So it goes from the condition, begin is the start of the loop, and the end keyword here is the ending of that loop. Any questions on this one? Now remember, your program is logical, your program is sequential. So if you have something outside of the loop, it will still continue to run until it reaches this keyword end. And then lastly, we looked at the for loop. This is how you create the for loop. So for line is going to be starting off with a 1, and it's going to increment automatically up to 10. Do begin that loop, end that loop here. So the body is going to be this part here. Whatever is inside the body, that's going to be carried out and repeated for 10 times. Any questions on anything, or you guys feel we covered enough, or you want us to continue? What's the difference between write line and write? So both are used for outputs, but the only difference is that where they place the cursor after you finish your output. So for instance, the write line, the write is going to keep the cursor right after the output, whereas write line is going to put the cursor in the next line. So like notice all of these examples here where we have hello and a number. Notice all of them are in different lines. So if I take out the line from the first one, the hello and the number are now going to appear in the same line. So compile and run, all of them appear in the same line. All right, any other questions before we close off? All right, if no questions, we'll be wrapping up here for tonight. Enjoy the rest of your night.
Sir,
Yes,
I would like to show you the program that I've been working on.
no problem.
Okay. I need to show you the instructions too, so yeah. Do I send it to you or just right here?
You can screen share if you want.
Okay. So, this piece at the top here is the problem.